Stranded at a rest stop at 22. My journey begins. Reddit family. Welcome to Silent Wars. In today's emotional Reddit family story, we'll dive into a powerful tale of family betrayal, resilience, and the strength to overcome hardship. A young person shares their personal journey of being abandoned at a rest stop by their own family, and how they built a new life from nothing. If you're moved by this story, don't forget to like, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell for more stories like this. Your support means the world to us. The emotional toll of family abandonment and finding strength in independence. It was supposed to be an ordinary summer day for me when I turned 22, a moment when life should have felt like any other. I had spent most of my time working at my father's hardware store, trying to make ends meet while living at home. Growing up, I never expected anything special for birthdays or holidays. The idea of Disney vacations or family trips was a far-off dream. Yet, when my father Banks announced we were going on a road trip for my uncle's wedding in Colorado, I should have known that something wasn't right. But it wasn't until we reached a small rest stop in the middle of nowhere that I realized how far from normal my life was. The road trip started like any other with my father and my brother, Alan, teaming up to make my life miserable. Alan, the golden child, had always been the favored one. As I sat in the back of our family's dark green Suburban, exhausted from the constant teasing, I couldn't help but wonder why it seemed that no matter how hard I tried, my efforts were never enough. My father's harsh words telling me I was useless echoed in my mind. I was used to it by then. But this was different. This was the moment when I truly understood what it meant to feel completely abandoned, betrayed by the very people who were supposed to love and protect me. When we stopped at that rest stop in Colorado, the whole family seemed to be in their usual routine. My father and brother were laughing at something I didn't understand, and my mother Irene was checking her makeup in the mirror. I was wearing an old Metallica t-shirt, some jeans with a hole in one knee, and beat-up Vans, nothing out of the ordinary for me. I stepped out of the car to stretch my legs and use the bathroom. When I came back, though, everything had changed. The parking spot where our car had been was now empty. First, I thought it was a joke. They were probably trying to scare me, I told myself. But after an hour of sitting on the curb watching people come and go, I realized they weren't coming back. My family had abandoned me. The harshness of betrayal from your own blood cuts deeper than any betrayal from others. Sitting alone on that curb, I felt my whole life flash before my eyes. My mother's empty protests, my father's cold dismissals, and Alan's cruel laughter echoed in my mind. I was no longer just the unwanted child. I was the punching bag for their amusement. But in that moment of pure isolation, something changed. I realized that I didn't need them. And for the first time in my life, I was free to make my own choices. With no money, phone, or identification, I knew I had to act fast. I approached a kind woman at the rest stop and asked to borrow her phone, but not to call my family. Instead, I reached out to find the nearest shelter in Grand Junction, about 40 miles away. With her help, I made my way to the shelter, and what followed was the start of my new life. That first night in the shelter, I had nothing except the clothes on my back. But it was a reality check that I desperately needed. The following days were a whirlwind. I worked long shifts at a small diner called Sonny's, washing dishes for a woman named Geraldine. She was tough but kind in her own way, and she taught me how to survive. It was there that I learned that hitting rock bottom doesn't mean you have nowhere to go. It's when you realize that the only way left is up. Working double shifts, living in a shelter, and dressing in donated clothes wasn't easy, but it was my reality, and I was determined to make it work. A week after being abandoned, I received a call from my mother. Her voice was shaking as she asked where I was and expressed worry. But behind her words, I could hear the insincerity. My father's voice in the background told me to stop being dramatic and just go to Uncle Rick's. I could hear Alan laughing. That's when I realized they hadn't been worried about me at all. They were just testing me to see if I could make it on my own. I hung up the phone, blocked their numbers, and never looked back. The feeling of freedom was intoxicating. I had a plan now. Within a month, I had a small studio apartment above a laundromat. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I had finally built something on my own. Over the next few years, I worked my way up from dishwasher to prep cook at Sonny's. I learned how to live without the constant weight of my family's expectations, how to create my own sense of worth, and how to rebuild my life without relying on anyone who had abandoned me. It wasn't easy. There were lonely nights when I scrolled through Instagram and saw photos of families that truly loved and cared for each other. The holidays were the worst, and the ache of missing that sense of connection sometimes threatened to consume me. But I reminded myself that I was building something better than what I had left behind. I was creating a life that was mine on my terms. 5 years after being abandoned, I had built a modest but stable life in Colorado. I had a home, a career, and a partner who supported me in ways I never thought possible. Then one day my mother reached out again. But this time it wasn't for reconciliation. It was for money. They had fallen on hard times, and my father's business had failed. My mother needed knee surgery she couldn't afford, and Alan had failed at yet another business venture. But I had learned my lesson. I didn't care about their struggles anymore. Instead of anger, I felt a strange sympathy for them. The giants who had once controlled my life were now small and broken. I realized I didn't need their approval or love. What I had built for myself was far more meaningful than anything they could offer. In the end, my family's need for money only reinforced my decision. I had learned that the best revenge was not seeking retaliation or holding on to anger. It was in living my life on my terms, free from the constraints they had imposed on me. And with that, I had finally achieved the closure I needed. My family may have abandoned me, but I had created something far more important. My own home, my own family, and my own future. The journey of overcoming family betrayal and finding true freedom. It was a summer like any other when I turned 22, or so I thought. I had spent years working at my father's hardware store, living at home, doing what I could to help the family business. Despite the difficulties, we weren't poor, but we didn't have the luxuries that others enjoyed. We didn't go on Disney vacations or have family trips that others talked about. So when my father, Banks, announced that we were going on a road trip for my uncle's wedding in Colorado, I never imagined that this trip would be the start of my liberation. But it turned out to be much more than just a road trip. It became the moment that changed my life forever. The journey began like any other family trip, but it didn't take long for the reality of what was happening to hit me. My brother, Alan, the golden child, and my father took turns bullying me, making my life miserable with constant mockery and cruelty. My mother, Irene, would occasionally protest with her frail voice, but it was clear that she didn't have the strength to stand up to my father. It felt like I was a perpetual target in my own family, caught between my father's harsh criticisms and Alan's relentless teasing. Still, I had grown accustomed to it over the years, and the idea of escaping seemed impossible. 3 days into the journey, I regretted not staying home. We had reached a desolate rest stop in Colorado, miles away from any town, surrounded by fields and distant mountains. I had been sleeping in the back of our old green Suburban, exhausted and in need of a break. I stepped out to use the restroom, expecting to return to the same scene, my family laughing together, not a care in the world. But when I came back outside, I was stunned to see the parking spot empty. My family had vanished, leaving me stranded with no money, no phone, and no way to contact anyone. First, I thought it was a prank. Maybe they had moved the car as a joke, I told myself. But as the minutes turned into hours and no one returned, the weight of the betrayal began to sink in. I sat on the curb, feeling the crushing realization that my family had abandoned me. As the hours passed, I watched other travelers come and go, each passing glance serving as a reminder of how alone I truly was. My heart sank, and I began to feel the sting of betrayal in ways I had never imagined. The people I trusted most had left me to fend for myself. With nothing but the clothes on my back, I had no choice but to take action. I could have called my family, begging them to come back, but something inside me stopped me from doing that. Instead, I approached a mother with 2 children at the rest stop, asking if I could use her phone. But instead of contacting my family, I used the phone to call a shelter in Grand Junction, about 40 miles away. I asked the woman for a ride, telling her that my family had an emergency and would come for me later. She hesitated but agreed, and with that, I began my journey to self-reliance. The shelter provided me with the basics: a place to sleep, food, and a chance to regain some control over my life. I was in a foreign town with no money or identification, but I knew I had to start somewhere. I used their computer to search for work and discovered an opportunity at a small diner called Sonny's. The owner, Geraldine, a woman in her 60s with gray hair streaked with purple, was tough but kind. She hired me on the spot, and I began working long hours as a dishwasher, barely making enough to survive. But every day, I moved closer to the person I wanted to be. Days turned into weeks, and I worked tirelessly to make ends meet. I saved every penny I could, bought a cheap phone and started piecing my life back together. Meanwhile, my family reached out. My mother called, her voice trembling, claiming they had been looking for me and were worried. But as I listened, I heard the truth behind her words. It wasn't concern. It was just an excuse to justify their abandonment. My father's voice in the background told me to stop acting theatrically. Alan laughed in the distance. That was when I knew for sure. They didn't care about me. They were just testing to see if I would come crawling back. But I wasn't going to do that. Instead of responding, I blocked their numbers and changed my phone number entirely. I was done being their punching bag. For the first time in my life, I had control over my future. I moved into a small studio apartment above a laundromat. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it was the first step in building my own life. I worked hard, first as a dishwasher, then as a prep cook, and eventually as an assistant manager at Sunny's. I built my confidence, my independence, and my sense of self-worth. Over the years, I received countless messages from my family, begging me to come home to forgive them. But I never replied. I didn't need their approval or their validation. I had finally found freedom, and it was more rewarding than I could have ever imagined. There were lonely nights, especially around the holidays, when I saw families together and longed for what I had missed. But I learned to embrace my own path, building a life filled with small victories that meant more than anything I had ever experienced with my family. Years later, after I had established a stable life, I learned that my family had fallen on hard times. My father's business had failed, and they were now reaching out to me for money. I felt no anger, just a quiet sense of satisfaction. They weren't looking for me because they cared they needed something from me. But I had learned that the greatest form of revenge is living well and living on your own terms. I didn't need to hold grudges or confront them. I had already won by building a life they could never destroy. In the end, I realized that the best thing I could do for myself was to continue building my own life, one that wasn't shaped by the toxicity of my past. I had created something far more meaningful than what I had left behind. A life of independence, self-worth, and freedom. I had proven to myself and to them that I didn't need them to be whole. What I needed was to trust in myself, to rise above the pain, and to build a future on my own terms. Finding strength after family betrayal. A journey to independence. When I turned 22, I thought my life would follow a familiar, predictable path. I worked at my father's hardware store, living at home, doing what I could to help the family business. While we weren't wealthy, we weren't destitute either. But we didn't have the luxuries that many others had, such as family vacations to Disney or weekends away. So when my father, Banks, announced that we would be taking a family road trip to my uncle's wedding in Colorado, I had no idea what was in store for me. I had no idea that this seemingly innocent trip would mark the beginning of a profound personal transformation. Looking back, I realize I should have known something was off. My family, particularly my father and my brother Alan, had always been a source of emotional turmoil for me. My father wasn't the type to offer encouragement or praise. Instead, he would wake me up at 3 a.m. to yell about something I had forgotten or criticize me for my perceived inadequacies. Since I was young, he had told me I was useless, and this deeply affected my sense of self-worth. Meanwhile, Alan, my golden child brother, always played the role of the favored one, learning early on that he could either side with my father or take on my role as the family's punching bag. It wasn't hard to guess which path Alan chose. The road trip started like any other, but it quickly took a toll on my emotional state. 3 days into the trip, I was regretting not coming up with an excuse to stay home. My father and Alan spent most of their time mocking me, making cruel jokes at my expense, while my mother, Irene, offered little more than weak protests. Her attempts to mediate felt empty, like mere lip service. It was clear she had long given up standing up to my father. Eventually, we reached a rest stop in Colorado, a barren, desolate place in the middle of nowhere. I had been sleeping in the back of our old Suburban and decided to step out to stretch my legs. My father and Alan were laughing together, and my mother was checking her makeup in the car mirror. I remember what I was wearing. A faded Metallica t-shirt, pants with a hole in the knee, and worn-out vans that had seen better days. I didn't take my phone because it was charging in the car, and I didn't take my wallet because we were in the middle of nowhere, and it seemed unnecessary. When I came back from the restroom, I was greeted with an empty parking spot. My family had disappeared, leaving me stranded with no phone, no money, and no way to contact anyone. Initially, I assumed they had moved the car as some kind of joke, but after wandering the rest stop and seeing no sign of them, the reality set in. They had left me behind, and it wasn't a joke. The sense of betrayal by my own family was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I had been abandoned not just by my family, but by the very people who were supposed to love and support me. For hours I sat on the curb telling myself that they would come back, that this was just a prank. But as the minutes turned into hours, I realized they weren't coming back. My initial impulse was to beg someone for a phone so I could contact them, but something inside me stopped me. The memories of a lifetime of cruelty and humiliation flooded my mind. I realized that I didn't want to beg them to come back. I was tired of being their punching bag. Instead of calling my family, I decided to take a different path. I borrowed a phone from a woman with 2 children at the rest stop and called a local shelter in Grand Junction, 40 miles away. I told the woman my family had left because of an emergency, and she reluctantly agreed to give me a ride into town. That night I spent my first night in a shelter, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a realization that I had to fend for myself. The shelter was a harsh reality check. I had nothing, no money, no ID, no connections, but I wasn't about to give up. I used their computer to search for work and found a job washing dishes at a local diner named Sunny's. The owner, Geraldine, a tough woman with purple-streaked gray hair and more tattoos than I ever expected, hired me on the spot. I was grateful, but I knew this was just the beginning. I worked long hours, sometimes double shifts, and slept at the shelter. But I was determined to make something of myself, to build a life that wasn't controlled by the toxicity of my past. Over the next few months, I started to build a new life. I saved money, got a new phone, and worked my way up from dishwasher to prep cook. Every day, I was one step closer to the person I wanted to become. But despite my progress, my family continued to try and contact me, sending messages and emails. My mother begged me to come home, my father demanded I return, and Alan sent messages claiming it was all just a joke. But I didn't respond. I knew that my true freedom lay in severing ties with them. I blocked their numbers and never looked back. A month after being abandoned, I had my own small studio apartment. It was far from perfect, but it was mine. I worked hard to pay rent and build a life on my own terms. Over time, I moved up in my job and even started taking classes in business management and accounting. I no longer felt worthless. The more I built my own life, the less I felt tied to the past. The loneliness still hit hard sometimes, especially during the holidays when I saw other families celebrating together. But I had learned to embrace my own independence. I had learned that my value didn't come from my family's approval or love. It came from within. Years later, my family reached out again asking for money. They had fallen on hard times, my father's business had failed, and my brother was struggling financially. But I felt no anger, no desire to help. I realized that they weren't seeking me because they cared. They needed something. For the first time, I understood that I had outgrown them. I had built my own life, one that was better and more fulfilling than anything they could offer. By the time they contacted me, I had long since forgiven them, not for their sake, but for mine. I had learned that true freedom comes not from seeking revenge, but from living well and on your own terms. It's a freedom that no one can take away from you, no matter how hard they try. I had built something far better than what I had left behind, a life of independence, strength, and self-worth. That, to me, was the greatest victory of all. Reclaiming control after family betrayal. A story of resilience. At the age of 22, my life took an unexpected and traumatic turn, forever altering my relationship with my family. I had always felt like the underdog in my household, constantly belittled and made to feel insignificant by my father, Banks, and my younger brother, Alan, who was always considered the golden child. Growing up, my father's harsh words and critical nature were constant reminders that I was never good enough. But nothing could have prepared me for the ultimate betrayal. Being abandoned by my own family at a rest stop during a road trip to my uncle's wedding in Colorado. It started like any other day. I was working at my father's hardware store, living at home, doing what I could to contribute to the family. Our finances were tight, but we got by. We didn't go on lavish vacations, nor did we indulge in luxuries. I never imagined that the family road trip would be anything other than a typical getaway. However, things quickly took a dark turn when we stopped at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere, Colorado. I had been sleeping in the back of our old Suburban when I decided to stretch my legs and use the restroom. When I returned to the parking lot, I was greeted with an empty space where our car had once been. At first, I thought they were playing a prank on me, but as the minutes turned into hours, it became painfully clear. They had left me behind. Betrayal by one's own family feels different than anything else. It's a deep, soul-crushing pain that cuts through the very core of your being. I sat on the curb for hours, convincing myself that they would come back. But as time passed, the reality settled in. They were not coming back. I wanted to reach out for help, to call them and beg them to return. But something inside me stopped me. The memories of all the times they had humiliated me, laughed at my expense, and treated me as less than nothing flooded my mind. This wasn't just a random prank, it was a culmination of years of emotional abuse and neglect. I made the decision not to beg for their help. Instead, I borrowed a phone from a woman at the rest stop and contacted a local shelter in Grand Junction, about 40 miles away. I told her that my family had to leave urgently, and she agreed to drive me to town. That night in the shelter, I was forced to confront the harsh reality of my situation. I had nothing, no money, no phone, no identification. But I refused to stay down. I knew that if I was going to survive, I had to keep moving forward. I quickly found a job washing dishes at a small diner called Sonny's. The owner, Geraldine, a tough woman in her 60s with purple-streaked gray hair and a no-nonsense attitude, hired me on the spot. The work was grueling, but it gave me a sense of purpose, something to hold on to in the midst of everything I had lost. Over the next few weeks, I worked long shifts, sleeping in the shelter and wearing donated clothes. It was a humbling experience, but it was also a turning point. I was no longer the victim of my family's cruelty. I was learning how to take control of my life, to build something for myself. With the help of a shelter employee, Dave, I managed to replace my ID and buy a cheap prepaid phone. 1 week after being abandoned, I received a call from my mother. She seemed genuinely concerned, asking where I was and why I hadn't contacted them. She claimed that they had been looking for me everywhere, and that it was all just a joke. I didn't believe her. I knew that this wasn't about concern, it was about them trying to reassert control over me. I calmly explained to my mother that I had made it on my own and that I was doing fine. I told her that I didn't need them anymore and blocked her number. I also blocked every other family member who had tried to reach out to me. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I was finally free from the emotional manipulation and toxic dynamics that had ruled my life for so long. Within a month, I had my own studio apartment. It wasn't much, a small, cramped space above a laundromat, but it was mine. I had worked hard to get there, and I wasn't about to let anything or anyone take that from me. I kept my head down, worked at the diner, and started taking classes in business management and accounting. Slowly but surely, I was rebuilding my life. I spent the next few years working my way up at Sonny's, moving from dishwasher to prep cook, and eventually assistant manager. I even saved enough money to help pay off some of my wife Kendra's medical school loans. She had become my rock, the person who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Her unwavering support helped me push through the tough times when loneliness and self-doubt crept in. Despite the painful memories of my family, I had found new people who truly cared about me. 5 years after being abandoned at that rest stop, I learned of my family's struggles. My father's business had failed, and my brother Alan had been arrested multiple times. I was told that my mother had been asking about me, and that they wanted to reconcile. But I wasn't interested. The message was clear. They weren't seeking me out because they cared. They needed something from me. At that moment, I realized something powerful. I had finally built a life for myself, one that didn't depend on my family's approval or support. I had found freedom not through revenge or anger, but through the choices I made and the life I created on my own. The greatest retribution I could give them was not to return to their toxic embrace, but to continue living my life on my terms, with the people who truly cared about me. Years later, my family reached out again, and I was able to observe their lives from a distance. I realized that they hadn't changed. They had simply fallen further into their own struggles, and now they wanted me to come back and fix everything for them. But I knew better. The most important lesson I had learned was that I didn't need them to be whole. I had built something far greater than they ever could, a life of independence, peace, and strength. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory. The journey from abandonment to strength. A story of redemption. At the age of 22, I found myself stranded at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere, left behind by the people I once called family. It wasn't just a random event, but the culmination of years of emotional abuse and neglect. My father, Banks, and my younger brother, Alan, had always made me feel like I was worthless. They belittled me at every turn, and I was often the target of their cruel jokes. But that day at the rest stop was more than just a moment of abandonment. It was the moment I realized that I had to break free from their toxic influence and take control of my life. Growing up, I was the invisible child in the family. My brother Alan was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my father's eyes. While Alan excelled and was showered with praise, I was constantly criticized. My father made it clear that my dreams, my ambitions, and even my very existence didn't matter. College was a joke to him, and working at his hardware store was the only option he saw for me. Yet even that wasn't enough. I was made to feel like I was nothing, just a burden. It was no surprise then when, on our family road trip to my uncle's wedding in Colorado, I found myself once again at the receiving end of their cruelty. The trip had started like any other. Tensions in the car were high, and my father and brother took turns tormenting me. They found amusement in my discomfort, while my mother, Irene, sat quietly, offering little more than weak protests. But as the trip wore on, I began to regret not making up an excuse to stay home. We stopped at a remote rest stop in Colorado, and I decided to stretch my legs and use the restroom. I was tired and just wanted a moment to clear my head. I didn't bring my wallet or phone with me, both were in the car, as we were in the middle of nowhere. But when I came out of the restroom, the parking lot was empty. The Suburban that had carried us across the country was gone. At first, I thought they were playing a cruel joke on me. But after searching the area and waiting for over an hour, it became painfully clear that they had abandoned me. There I was, alone in a place that felt like the middle of nowhere, with nothing but the clothes on my back. It wasn't just the physical isolation that hurt, it was the realization that my own family had left me behind, without a second thought. The betrayal stung more deeply than I could have ever imagined. As the hours passed, the pain of their abandonment was replaced by a cold, steely determination. I refused to let them see me beg. The memories of all the times they had laughed at me, humiliated me, and made me feel worthless flooded my mind. I wasn't going to make the mistake of trying to contact them. Instead, I asked a kind stranger if I could use her phone. She hesitated but agreed, and I called a shelter in Grand Junction, about 40 miles away. I didn't want to reach out to my family, I wanted to be free from them. That night in the shelter was a wake-up call. I had nothing, but I knew I could survive. I quickly found work at a small diner called Sonny's. The owner, Geraldine, was tough, but she saw something in me. She gave me a chance, and I worked long hours, earning my first paycheck and starting to rebuild my life. But even as I worked and began to find some stability, I couldn't shake the thoughts of my family. They continued to reach out, sending emails and texts, begging me to come back, claiming it was all a joke. But I saw through their lies. I blocked them all. I didn't want to go back to the life they had tried to impose on me. I didn't want to be their punching bag anymore. I was building something for myself, something they would never understand. Months passed, and I kept working at the diner. I saved every penny I could, and eventually, I was able to move into my own small apartment above a laundromat. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I had my own space, my own life, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone take that away from me. But the loneliness wasn't easy to bear. There were nights when I felt the weight of my past, when I saw pictures on Instagram of families who seemed to love and care for each other, and I wondered if I would ever know that kind of love. The holidays were the hardest. I felt the sting of rejection, the ache of abandonment, but I pushed through. Every day, I woke up in my little apartment and went to my dishwashing job, determined to build something better for myself. 3 months after being abandoned, I got an email from my mother. She said my grandmother was asking about me, and begged me to just let them know I was alive. I closed the email, erased the account, and threw my old SIM card away. That was the moment I truly let go. I wasn't going back and I didn't need their approval. 5 years passed, and I built a new life in Colorado. I had worked my way up at Sonny's, from dishwasher to line cook to assistant manager. I even went back to school, taking online classes to improve my skills. I was thriving, and I was no longer the broken person my family had left behind. Then one day I saw a post about my brother Alan. He had been arrested for a DUI and had crashed his car. I didn't feel satisfaction or pleasure in his downfall, but I did feel something significant. I realized that the people who had once controlled my life were falling apart, and I was finally free. My life had changed drastically. I had a family now: Kendra, my wife, and our 2 children. We lived in a modest home, and I had built a career for myself. Geraldine, the woman who had given me a chance when I had nothing, had become like a second mother to me. But even as I moved forward, my family kept trying to reach out. They wanted something from me, not reconciliation. They had no interest in making amends, they just needed money. And in that moment I realized how far I had come. I no longer cared about their manipulation. I had built a life of my own, and nothing they could say or do would take that from me. This story isn't just about betrayal, it's about reclaiming your power, building your own life, and finding the strength to walk away from toxic relationships. It's a reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't in what we do to others, but in what we create for ourselves. I've built a life that's mine, and no one can take that away from me. The struggle of family favoritism and the power of forgiveness. Family is often seen as a cornerstone in one's life, a source of love, support, and understanding. For most people, the idea of family is synonymous with care and unconditional love. However, for some, the reality of family relationships is far more complicated, especially when favoritism and emotional manipulation come into play. The story of a young woman, abandoned by her family and later forced to confront them after years of silence, reveals the harsh realities of family favoritism, the pain of betrayal, and ultimately, the power of forgiveness and self-discovery. At the heart of this story is the concept of family favoritism. From an early age, the protagonist's family made it clear that her younger sister, Molin, was the perfect child, the golden one in their eyes. No matter how much effort the protagonist put into her life or how hard she tried to gain her parents' approval, it was never enough. Molin seemed to excel at everything, while the protagonist struggled to find her place within her own family. This emotional manipulation created a rift, as the protagonist was forced to live in the shadow of her sister, constantly feeling unimportant and overlooked. Despite her accomplishments and achievements, the protagonist's parents always seemed to favor Molin, giving her preferential treatment and showering her with praise. It became clear that no matter what the protagonist did, she would never be able to measure up to her sister in their eyes. This constant favoritism began to erode the protagonist's sense of self-worth. She felt trapped in a toxic cycle of trying to please her parents, only to be met with disappointment and rejection. As a result, her relationship with her family became strained, and she grew increasingly distant from them. The emotional toll of being treated as second best, year after year, was devastating. Eventually, this toxic environment led to a breaking point. The protagonist made the decision to step away from her family and confront the harsh reality of the relationship she had with them. Years later, after having moved on from her past and built a new life for herself, the protagonist's family tried to reconnect. Her parents, struggling with their own issues, began reaching out to her. They claimed that they missed her and wanted to reconcile, but the protagonist was skeptical. It wasn't long before she realized that their intentions weren't truly about mending the broken relationship. They were seeking money. Her father had lost his business, her mother was facing medical bills, and her sister was dealing with a failed business venture. They needed financial help, and they saw the protagonist as a potential source of salvation. This revelation was a painful reminder of the emotional neglect and manipulation she had experienced throughout her life. Instead of feeling anger or resentment, however, the protagonist felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. She understood that the years of pain and hardship had shaped her into a person who was capable of standing up for herself and creating a life on her own terms. She no longer needed their approval or their support. In this moment of reckoning, the protagonist made the difficult decision to walk away from her family once and for all. She chose not to engage in their manipulation, refusing to let them pull her back into the toxic dynamic they had created. Instead of seeking revenge or holding on to past grudges, the protagonist found peace in the life she had built for herself. She realized that true freedom came not from punishing those who had hurt her, but from living a life of authenticity and self-respect. Over the years, the protagonist learned to embrace forgiveness, not for her family's sake, but for her own. She found healing in letting go of the pain and resentment that had once defined her relationship with them. While the wounds of the past would never fully disappear, she came to understand that holding on to that anger would only continue to weigh her down. Forgiveness, in this context, was not about excusing the actions of her family, it was about freeing herself from their grip. As time passed, the protagonist's life continued to flourish. She found a sense of purpose in her work, developed meaningful relationships, and built a loving family of her own. Her journey was not without struggles, and there were moments when the memories of her past resurfaced, threatening to undo the progress she had made. But with each passing day, she became stronger, more resilient, and more determined to live life on her own terms. The protagonist's story serves as a powerful reminder of the impact that family favoritism and emotional manipulation can have on an individual. It also highlights the importance of breaking free from toxic relationships and finding the strength to move forward. Ultimately, this story teaches that while the past may shape who we are, it does not have to define our future. By embracing forgiveness, self-worth, and personal growth, we can find the courage to create a life filled with love, peace, and fulfillment. For anyone struggling with similar experiences, this story serves as a beacon of hope. It shows that even in the face of betrayal and abandonment, there is always the possibility of healing and growth. It reminds us that the most important relationship we can cultivate is the one we have with ourselves, and that by letting go of the pain of the past, we can build a brighter, more fulfilling future. The story highlights powerful lessons about resilience, self-worth, and the importance of breaking free from toxic relationships. For many, family can be a source of both love and pain, especially when favoritism or manipulation is involved. However, it's crucial to recognize that our worth is not determined by others' perceptions or actions. The protagonist's journey teaches that true freedom comes not from seeking revenge or approval, but from choosing to live authentically and nurturing the relationships that truly matter. This message is especially poignant for those in their later years, as it reminds us that healing is a lifelong process. Letting go of past hurts, forgiving not for others, but for our own peace, can transform our lives. It's never too late to reclaim our power and create the life we deserve, surrounded by love and peace. As we age, we are given the opportunity to reflect, let go of past burdens, and focus on the present moment, which is a gift we can truly cherish. This story encourages us to prioritize our well-being, cherish the relationships that uplift us, and embrace the wisdom that comes with age, choosing peace over pain, and healing over holding on to past wounds. Thank you for watching this touching Reddit family story. We hope it inspired you as much as it did us. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe to Silent Wars, and don't forget to turn on the notifications to stay updated with our future content. We appreciate your continued support. See you in the next video.